Welcome once again to heartofthe-shepherd.com. My joy to come with today's devotional. I titled the message, or the devotional rather, Surviving and Thriving in a World Gone Mad. Our scripture reading, Psalm 37 and Psalm 71. But you're going to notice that the two scripture readings are lengthy, and we will find that we will have to limit our focus today to Psalm 37. In fact, the first 11 verses of Psalm 37. Word of introduction. You know, every day you and I are inundated with reports of violence and wickedness that can best be explained as evidence of abject depravity, human depravity, that we see in the world. In fact, not a day passes without random acts of violence and evil emblazoned across news headlines. In fact, we read of things that would have been unheard of some 40, 50 years ago: human trafficking, child abductions, pedophilia, rape, murder, and mayhem. They have all become the daily diet of news consumers. I think often what a sad contrast to my own childhood days, when the parents would allow children to play outside for hours without worrying that something of mischief would happen to them. And so we ask, what has happened? In a half century, we've gone from the caring neighbors to worrying about a child being abducted and molested. What has happened, and how should we as Bible believers respond to a culture that is the antithesis of godliness and morality? It's just the opposite. Where do you and I focus our thoughts and emotions when we witness injustices that grieve the soul and stir within us anger and resentment? Well, Psalm 37 and verses 1 through 11 tackle those questions. For instance, consider the first point of a righteous response living in a world gone mad. The first is, fret not. Psalm 37 and verses 1 and 2. Here we find the psalmist wrote, "Fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious or jealous against the workers of iniquity," literally, against the wicked. Now, assuming that Psalm 37 was authored by David, we find the king cautioned believers not to allow the sins of the wicked to stir them to anger. Instead, he admonished them not to be jealous when the wicked appear to prosper in their sins, as they often do in this fallen world. I'm reminded of Hebrews 11 and verse 25, where the author of Hebrews asserted, "There is pleasure in sin for a season, but only for a season." David stated much the same in verse 2, where he writes that the wicked, and I quote, "shall be cut off or cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb." Fret not is David's challenge to those living in a crazy, sin-mad world. Fret not, for God's wrath will inevitably consume the wicked in their sins, as surely as grass withers in the summer heat. Well, not only are we not to fret, but number 2, verses 3 and 4, we are to trust and delight in the Lord. Rather than fret and worry, people of faith were challenged to, 1, trust in the Lord, literally, to be confident in the Lord and do good. Do those things which are good and righteous in the sight of a holy God. "So shalt thou dwell in the land, and verily or faithfully thou shalt be fed, as a shepherd cares for his sheep." We know that David writes in Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd." Indeed, the Lord is the shepherd of all those who are willing to do good and to faithfully trust the Lord. So believers then are not only to trust, but would you notice also in verse 4 that they are to delight in the Lord? In fact, be assured, the Lord shall give thee the desires of thine heart. There are many that seek and wonder, what is the will of God? And the best way to answer that is do the will of God as you know it now. Trust Him. And He has promised, I will give you those things that your heart desires. You see, to delight implied contentment and satisfaction. And so how do people of faith delight in the Lord? Well, we delight in the Lord when we are content to enjoy His presence, when we study His Word, and thirdly, when we accept that His will and purpose are always good, according to Romans 8, verse 28 and 29. What a blessed assurance to know that when we delight in the Lord and trust Him, His will is our heart's desire. If our will is aligned with, or our hearts are aligned with God's will, then the desire of our hearts will be His will. Now there's a third instruction that's given for those living in a world that has gone mad, and it is found in verses 5 and 6. And it is to roll over on the Lord our burdens, our troubles, and anxieties. Let's look at that verse for a moment. Psalm 37, verse 5. Commit thy way unto the Lord. Now the word commit is the word for trust. The word for way means your journey, your course, or your path. So we're challenged, commit your way to the Lord. Then trust also in Him. There we are, back to being a man or woman of faith. And then we have this assurance in verse 5, and He, the Lord, shall bring it, His will, His desire to pass. In verse 6, He shall bring forth thy righteousness as the light, and thy judgment as the noonday. You might find yourself maligned by an enemy, the victim of gossip or lies and injustices. But we're assured here, if we'll trust in the Lord, if we'll delight in the Lord, He will ultimately deal with the wicked, and He will show who we are, righteous in the light of day. Then consider this thought of rolling on to the Lord our burdens, our anxieties. The way then is the life, the road, and the future. You see, when we give our lives to the Lord, as Romans 12 verse 1 tells us, you must also learn to trust Him. Psalm 37 and verse 5. And so David here then invited believers to be bold and confident that the Lord will accomplish His will. He will defend and vindicate us, verse 6, in the light of day. If you are right now perhaps a victim of attacks and lies and deceptions, just wait. Give those things to the Lord. After all, He is a righteous judge. You see, David understood what it was to be surrounded by the wicked and to be the victim of their unjustified attacks. Still, he encouraged believers that if they would delight, trust, and roll their troubles onto the Lord, they would find rest. Look at verse 7. Rest in the Lord. The meaning there is literally to be still or to be silent. So in this background of malicious attacks and living in a world of wickedness where that is a sin-mad world, David writes, rest in the Lord. Be still. In fact, he goes on and he says, and wait patiently for Him. And then back to the beginning of verse 1, fret not thyself because of him, the wicked who prospereth in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass. It is frustrating. Living in a world where we often see that the wicked and those who are evil seem to be rewarded for their wickedness, while the righteous suffer. But what would the Lord have us to do then in such a society? Well, verse 7, we need to rest in the Lord. Well, exactly what does that mean? Well, the word rest is essentially to be still or to be quiet. Think about how little quietness there is in the world today. You see, we've lost the discipline of silence. We are surrounded by noise and activity, constant noise devices, cell phones, radio, television, computers, social media. All of these things are loud and noisy, and in effect, they crowd out God. Like even our worship services for many churches happens to be loud and hectic, far from the description that we find here in the encouragement to rest in the Lord. And yet David encouraged his readers in verse 7, rest in the Lord. And by the way, wait patiently. And sadly, many are unwilling to be quiet long enough to pray, let alone to wait for the Lord to speak. Well, Psalm 37 and verse 8, David returned to the counsel he stated in the first verse of this chapter. We see that he urged the following, verse 8, cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not thyself in any wise to do evil. In other words, don't allow the ways of the wicked or the attacks of the wicked to provoke you to anger and wrath, and your soul become a noisy soul. In fact, David goes on and he writes again, echoing the first verse, fret not thyself in any wise to do evil. Don't seek vengeance. In other words, don't allow the sins of others to provoke you to sin. Don't be overcome with anxiety when the wicked flaunt their sin and appear to prosper. The king then reminded the saints that evildoers, verse 9, shall be cut off. But those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. You know, the wicked are often cut off very young in this life. In fact, some of the most famous names of the wicked who have prospered are often the ones who die in their 40s and 50s and 60s. And yet the righteous are promised, if we wait on the Lord, we'll inherit the earth. That is, we will be blessed. And then David continues in verse 10, for yet a little while, and the wicked shall not be. Yea, thou shalt diligently consider his place, and it shall not be. Just look in the headlines of this year or the year before at how many have died young, and many of them are going to be numbered among the wicked, often the ones that the world envies. And so we come then, as we approach verse 11. Although it is not a universal certainty, I have observed that the lives of the wicked are often cut short by the consequences of their sinful choices and evil lifestyles. I've also seen that the righteous are blessed and they prosper, often into their old age. Now, why is that? Because the Lord rewards those who wait on and look to Him. Well, verse 11. David assured believers that the meek, this portrait of humility, the meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. I love that. The meek shall inherit the earth, and they will find their delight in the abundance of peace. Not just peace, but the abundance of peace. Literally shalom, happiness and contentment. Well, some closing thoughts. In his Sermon on the Mount, Christ quoted Psalm 37 and verse 11 in verse 5 of Matthew 5. Here we read, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. You know, the world portrays the meek as weak. However, the biblical portrait of meekness is one who is spiritually disciplined and exercises self-control. The spiritually meek, then, are strong in their faith and convictions, but they're tender by God's grace and the work of His Holy Spirit. Someone has described and defined meekness as strength under control. Well, such a man is promised the Lord will give him an inheritance and lasting peace. Well, on a personal application, how do you respond to the prosperity of the wicked in the world? Psalm 37 has challenged us, verse 2, don't fret, don't worry. Verses 3 and 4, trust and delight in the Lord. Verse 5 and 6, roll onto the Lord your anxieties. And verse 7, rest, knowing the Lord will judge the wicked. Will you do that today, even now? Whatever the anxieties, whatever the fears, whatever the heartaches that you're wrestling with, will you not pray and trust the Lord? And be still, confident He will bless you with abundant peace. Well, I close today's devotional by bidding you God's blessing. Bye-bye.